So what the idea of the call today is, like we say, BizTalk has come to end of life, and it's how we transition to the cloud and embrace the new functionality on the Azure platform and Azure integration services. How we're going to play today is we'll do a brief introduction to your presenters. I'll give you an overview of how HSO. I'm not quite sure if people are familiar with HSO. I know some people have worked with us, others haven't. So I'll talk a little bit about what who HSO are, just to put it in perspective, but I won't focus too much on that. I'll try and breeze over it, and again, you can refer back to the slides later. The key things about it is to talk to our colleague, or Steph, our colleague in Microsoft, who's going to talk about the why BizTalk and what next in that environment, and then we'll go back to HSO, where Mark will then go through and talk about how you would actually do that and how we approach it. The one thing I'll come back in at the end, we've got two customers, which I'll give you examples of, two reference customers from the HSO side, where we've done complex BizTalk modernization programs up to Azure integration services, and we'll aim to leave you a little bit of time at the end. The one I'll move on first, and we'll introduce ourselves, and then I've got a little bit of a poll I just want to bring up to you as well. So again, my name's Stephen Simon. I'm the Business Development Manager for Integration Data and AI for HSO in the UK. I've been working in the platform space for about 25 years with various different companies, from IBM to SAP to Oracle, Microsoft. And for the past couple of years, I've been working with HSO, helping them build up their cloud business in these particular areas. I'm joined by my colleague, Mark Abrams.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm an integration architect at HSO. My integration journey started around 20 years ago with BizTalk Server 2004. I've been designing and developing integration solutions with almost every version of BizTalk ever since then. And over the last 6 years, my primary focus has been designing integration solutions in Azure, using Azure Integration Services, and helping customers to migrate their integration workloads from on-prem platforms and into Azure.
Hi, everybody. I'm Steph Locke. I'm here in the UK working at Microsoft with helping customers in the enterprise space across all sectors start leveraging software and integration capabilities to ship more value for their business. So, whilst we're sharing integration stories, my first integration product was SQL Server Integration Services, back in the shiny days of 2008, when everything was in one nice, easy SQL Server installation to get things done. Moved to the cloud as quickly as I could, loved it, and it is fantastic to spend my day helping companies get the most out of tech. So it's great to be here with HSO, and I've already heard an amazing story from Darius about how HSO have enabled their organization for more than a decade now. So thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Steph. And you've made me feel really old, because my first integration story goes back to 2000 with MQ series. So, you make me feel a little bit bad now. So anyway, swiftly moving on.
Yeah, a bit of DTS and everything between friends is all good.
Thank you. So this is the high level of the agenda, which I mentioned. I'll just give you that overview. And again, why is the time, and why are we talking about BizTalk modernization? What does it mean? And then again, that process, and the process we think is really important from the HSO side, to get that marriage of what is important to the business through to what are the capabilities and benefits of moving to a cloud platform. And again, those couple of examples I'll talk through at the end. Nina's prepared a poll, which she'll put in the chat, and it's just some basic questions on your environment. What we would like, if you could answer those, that would be great. Again, there's only about 4 questions. If the questions can come up, you can answer those questions, it'd be great. And it helps us when we get to the end and we start doing the question and answer. It gives us a sort of a straw poll of who's on the call, what are the challenge, and what are the sort of challenges, because we're familiar with the different versions, etc. That could be filled in. That would be excellent from our side. So if I jump in, talk about HSO, who are we? HSO is a Microsoft-focused only partner. We're about 30 years old. We're just over 30 years old. We've always worked with Microsoft. We don't work with any other partners at all. We're about 3,000 strong. We grow by about 30. At the moment, we're growing by about 30% year on year. We have had explosive growth in years like 2021 to 22. But we cover. We're headquartered out of the Netherlands. We're in 11 different countries, from the US through to multiple offices in Europe, but right across through to Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. In the UK, have a look at where we're based. We've got 3 offices in the UK. One of them is in Reading, near the Microsoft office. One of them is in Glasgow, and the main office, the registered office, is from Manchester, which is, I'm sure you'll gather if you're from the UK, which is where the Scouser called Stephen is based out of. Just to tell you a little bit more about it, when I say we're 100% with Microsoft, we're totally aligned with all the Microsoft portfolio. We deploy anything that Microsoft actually has in its portfolio, particularly on the cloud side, which is the most explosive growth inside of HSO, about 40 to 50%, depending on which division you're looking at. We're very industry focused, as the slide says on the right hand side. So we don't just do the technology. Why we're recognized by the analysts, Everest, Forrester, etc., is because we have not just industry specializations in the projects we've done. We also build a lot of accelerators on the technology, but also for the individual in the individual sectors in which we work within. And again, we do everything. When we say we do everything from the initial analysis and consultation right through to managed services with customers. What we like to say from our side is we're large enough to serve, yet we're small enough to care. Little tagline for you. The other thing I would say is, again, looking at just the cloud side, the biggest area of growth from our side is the cloud. And obviously, the integration, Azure Integration Services, sits inside of that. So we've got all of the designations and skills inside of that, obviously specifically around integration as well from this side. The one thing I would say is it's worth noting, this is your expert MSP status is something which is quite a valuable thing. I think there's about 20 odd companies around the world who have that status, HSO being one of them. And penultimate slide from my side really is, we're talking about integration today and how we move you from this on-premise world and embrace cloud, build that platform where you can start to move into innovations such as AI and lots of other areas. And integration is a critical part of that. The one thing I would like to say, again, I'm not going to read the slide out here, but one of the key things to remember is we know it's a complex area. We know there's many ways in which you can tackle depending on your business process. So one of the things which HSO really embraces is combining the business processes with the technical knowledge of the platform and the capabilities of the platform. And Mark will talk you through this a little bit more. When we virtually always start off with analysis to look at what are you trying to achieve as a business, and how do we enable that by introducing Azure Integration Services. But one of the key things today, like I say, two of the key presentations you're going to see is just give you that brief overview. This is just an example of some of the customers in the UK where we've deployed Azure Integration Services. Again, I've got 2 case studies at the back where I talk through complex migrations from BizTalk through to Azure Integration Services, where we worked with HSO International out the Netherlands, where our head office is. But now I'll pass over to you, Steph.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. Okay, so I guess the biggest question that a lot of you might be asking is why even bother with moving from BizTalk? Any product that you've been using for a decent chunk of time meets probably a good amount of your needs. So why even, why are you here today? Well, some of the problem that you might be facing is what used to work, what the connecting to your ERP, your line of business applications, and a whole bunch of things that were maybe just running, hopefully not just in some computers running under some desks, but I've worked in those types of organizations, but running in servers that you've been maintaining. The problem is that we've been getting a lot more complex. Like our frontline workers are expecting mobile applications and augmented reality, where taking best of breed solutions from different cloud providers and software as a service vendors. We're moving things into the cloud to reduce our carbon footprint, reduce our security perimeter, and reduce our ops burden. And we're also integrating a lot more operational technology that previously you might have had just like a historian and some extracts. So there's a lot more of a complicated ecosystem that our integration platform may no longer be as comfortable for as it used to be. And we really need that great capability, because if we don't have computers talking to computers easily, then we end up with humans in the middle and relying on swivel chair integrations. So if we can talk to applications, then we can integrate data more seamlessly. We can communicate within our supply chain. We can communicate with our devices in our environments. We can use the information for better decision making, and we can enable more people and processes when we have the data in the right place at the right time. So you might be struggling in one or more of these areas right now with, if you've already got BizTalk, to be kind of working at the speed that you'd like to be working for this. Modernizing your environment is going to give you some benefits. So you would hopefully be able to move more quickly. You can cope with your business's growing demands in a more cost-efficient way instead of pricing for highest demand. You have an increased security focus by moving to the cloud, which is something that I think we're all very conscious of today when it's becoming increasingly more complex to secure our environments. You're able to start buying more best of breed applications and be able to customize what you do to be able to integrate. And developers and our teams really want to be able to, sorry, my Wi-Fi was just a little bit iffy there. So we want to be able to continue having IT staff who really deliver great value and feel energized and thrive in what they do. And and we often see that translate into a demand to be using some of the latest technologies, because that helps them solve challenges more effectively and helps them stay current in their capabilities. So there's a lot of reasons to modernize. But one of the things that can be a bit of a problem is that's a lot of benefits, but sometimes we need, sometimes we're actually facing a challenging event that forces us to grow. And one of the things that might force you to grow is that BizTalk is being end-of-lifed. So the 2020 version is going to move out of mainstream support in about 3 years' time, and is going to be limited extended support after that. So there is only a fixed amount of time, a finite amount of time where your existing assets and investments in your integration platform are going to be often supported and kind of considered acceptable inside your organization's compliance, cybersecurity, and governance processes. So when we're thinking about that positive move of being able to have increased flexibility in everything, but also kind of helping us get future ready for when BizTalk moves out of support, you're going to need to make sure that you have a few things. So you're going to have to think about, how do you do any event-driven activities? How do you move data around at scale? How do you enable computer-to-computer communication via APIs? How do you look after your code? And how do you automate business processes? So in the cloud, in the Azure environment, we have a toolbox that enables you to use best fit tools for the different challenges, and they all plug and play. So you have Service Bus and Event Grid for events and messages. We've got Data Factory to move data at scale, functions for just writing business logic as code, logic apps for low code process automation. So we have a compelling toolbox that you'll be able to use when you move to the cloud. So just wrapping up for me before I hand over to Mark, it's worth migrating because you might already be running in the cloud. We could already see that 5 of you or 55% of the attendees were already either running BizTalk in the cloud or running hybrid. So you can continue consolidating your gains. You'll be able to pay for just what you use. You'll be able to use some of the latest and greatest capabilities, be able to move some of your assets with minimal effort, and be able to connect to lots of those great best of breed applications that you might be currently struggling to integrate with. So there's a lot of great value that you're going to be able to get in taking these steps. And I hope you all enjoy hearing about how HSO can give you some good practices and enable you to do this move. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Steph. Okay. So in terms of what's in it for you, Steph's been through some of the key drivers for that modernisation journey from BizTalk to Azure. I've got a few more that are highlighted on this slide. For me, some of the key ones were around, especially around legacy technologies. BizTalk was originally designed back in the early 2000s. The state of integration back in those days was very different to how it is now. We used to use XML. We used to use a lot of SOAP for service-to-service communication. But everything's moved on in the integration space now. We're talking about using JSON. We talk about using REST APIs for talking to SaaS applications and more. And we're using lots of more other modern API standards and such as OAuth and OpenAPI that just aren't supported by BizTalk. Even to implement REST communication with BizTalk, it's all less than ideal in having to implement translators as you receive and send those messages. Whereas when you get into the world of Azure and Azure Integration Services, it's a much better story, a much better experience. Azure Integration Services has been designed with these modern integration standards and protocols from the start. Some of the others, for me, some of the other sort of benefits of this migration is around the knowledge. I mean, it's no secret really that BizTalk development wasn't the fastest process. You need a lot of effort and a lot of knowledge to create those BizTalk integration processes and also to support them in the operational system. But in the world of Azure Integration Services, it's a much more streamlined process. Being able to author and deploy workflows is much, much faster than it ever was in BizTalk. And it's a first-class experience, whether you're using a web browser or whether you're a developer using tools on your laptop that you're familiar with, like VS Code and the like. So how does this actually work in Azure? You've got your BizTalk implementation. How does it actually, how do those capabilities and features translate to something in Azure Integration Services? Microsoft has spent a lot of time and effort over the last year making sure that there's a seamless migration journey for all of your BizTalk features and components as you move to Azure. I've tried to list some of them on this page, not all of them, but some of the key ones. And the key message here is that for all of those components you have in BizTalk, there is a corresponding component in Azure and Azure Integration Services that will do the same thing. And if we'd have been having this conversation about a year ago, there were a few areas where there wasn't a natural equivalent within Azure. But we're in a state now where for all of those components within BizTalk, there is a corresponding component in Azure Integration Services that we will use as part of that migration. So, for example, if you've done BizTalk, you'll be very used to using BizTalk maps for data translation. In Azure, we use the Azure Data Mapper. So essentially the same in terms of that low-code, no-code visual design environment. But the one in Azure Integration Services has been optimized and improved, and in terms of productivity is a lot better than the one in BizTalk. One of the other key sort of things to note is that for many of these components, there is the ability to take some of those artifacts that you have currently in BizTalk and drop them into Azure and immediately reuse them. So, for example, if you've got, again, going back to that example with the BizTalk Mapper, which is essentially XSLT for transformations, you can take those existing investments that you have with XSLT, drop them into a Logic App environment in Azure and start using them. You don't need to redevelop them or re-engineer them. You can use them straight away. And it's true for some of the others as well. So the rules engine, for example, some of you may be using the rules engine and have got a series of policies and vocabularies that you're using. You can just lift and shift those into the equivalent rules engine within Azure. So what are the options as to when it comes with to modernizing BizTalk to Azure? Depending on where you are at the moment with your existing BizTalk solution, you may be just running it on a set of hardware in your own data center or a data center. And so one of the first choices that you've got is you can just take a lift and shift approach. And this is where you effectively move your BizTalk servers and the related databases from an on-prem servers into Azure virtual machines, infrastructure as a service, as we call it. And this works well, but it's still a BizTalk integration solution. You start off with BizTalk and you'll still have BizTalk. So there's some clear advantages of that. No rework or development to your integration processes. What runs in BizTalk on premise in your data center will continue to work on your virtual machines. And all of those BizTalk development and admin skills that you've got are still present. And perhaps you can use it to use the Azure platform to take advantage of any sort of availability and scalability capabilities that maybe you can't do with your own hardware in the data center. But there's one key problem with this approach. It's still BizTalk Server. You're still running BizTalk Server in Azure. And so the issues with the expiry of mainstream support in 2028 still applies. And you're not really in a position where you can start unlocking some of those key features and benefits of the Azure integration platform. So that one has limited scope, to be honest. The other approach is more of a hybrid approach, and this may be some of the one approach that some of you are using at the moment. So here, what you're doing is maybe you're keeping your existing integrations running in BizTalk, but all of your new integrations you're actually building out in Azure so that you can take advantage of those new features. It means that you can leverage those new features immediately, and it means that you don't necessarily need to migrate and re-engineer your existing processes. But the challenge with this is that you're sort of relying on business change programs to phase out your existing BizTalk integrations. You're running two integration platforms at the same time, your BizTalk and your Azure integration platform. And obviously that means you've got increased cost and effort to maintain them. And it still doesn't really solve the problem of running out of BizTalk mainstream support. So although this is an approach that many of you have probably tried, it still doesn't solve some of the fundamental problems. And that's where option 3 comes in. And that's a phased migration, where we look at a full re-implementation of your existing BizTalk processes in Azure. A lot of you will probably have quite large BizTalk deployments. And so we look at this as a series of phased migrations from BizTalk to Azure. We wouldn't recommend a big bang migration because it's just too complicated and too risky. But we look at working through a series of carefully planned phases and migrating them one at a time. And the benefits of that approach are fairly obvious. It's an accelerated migration approach, so the amount of time that you're running both of those integration processes is greatly reduced. That helps to reduce your costs. And it means you can completely retire that on-premise BizTalk server footprint sooner than the other options. And therefore, you can put in a plan in place that will mean that you can avoid that mainstream support ending in 2028. You can realize the associated cost savings a lot sooner. And it means that you can start leveraging all of those new features within Azure Integration Services much more quickly for all of your integration processes. Some of the drawbacks, though, are it is more complex to plan and coordinate. And that's true with any accelerated migration process. And it requires dedication and focus due to that accelerated process. So it requires a lot of buy-in and focus from customer and stakeholders. But this is the approach that we would always recommend, because it will allow you to quickly realize the benefits of Azure Integration Services, and it will allow you to put a plan in place that will ensure that you are off that BizTalk platform by 2028. And it may seem a long time away, 2028, but it will come around sooner than we imagine. And so it's best to start thinking about these things now. So how do we make this happen? So at HSO, we have a migration methodology we use for BizTalk to Azure migrations. And the first step for that methodology is a BizTalk to Azure assessment. So this is a relatively short 5-day exercise, and it has one key aim. It's a comprehensive analysis of your existing BizTalk environment to allow us and yourselves to understand how we can migrate from BizTalk to Azure for your integration workload. How can we, and the purpose of the migration allows us to assess the complexity and the scale of your implementation, so that we can then pull together a migration plan and timeline as to how we can make that migration happen over a series of phases. Some estimated migration costs, because you'll all be wanting to know how much is this going to cost, and some next step proposal. So after the assessment, what are the next steps that we would recommend? And there's a couple of key activities within this process. So one of the first things we'll be doing is looking at your existing BizTalk integration landscape. So we'll be looking at the infrastructure that you're running. That's either you're in your on-premise data center, or maybe you're running BizTalk in the cloud on virtual machines. We'll be looking at the environments that you have currently got stood up and how you use them. We'll be looking at your existing deployment strategies, and also be looking at any of the documentation that you've got at the moment, and how you've been using Microsoft best practice in terms of your implementations. We'll be then looking at your BizTalk platform. One of the main sort of approaches we use for this is we use the HSO BizTalk assessment tool. So this is a tool that we deploy onto your BizTalk server, and it generates a series of documentation reports that allow us to understand the size and complexity of your integration workload. So it gives us a listing of all of the components you're using, all of the adapters you're using. It goes through all of the receive locations, or the send ports, all of the orchestrations you're using, and it gives us a scoring matrix, so we can then understand how complex they are. And we also start thinking about what your monitoring story is like, because we need to make sure that we migrate that into Azure to make sure that we still have a robust monitoring story. And then the final part is the analysis. So we use the output of that tool, and we absolutely will share the output of that tool with you. But we use that to then start thinking about how we can plan a potential migration, what those phasing of those migrations might look like. Allows us to start thinking about that effort estimation, and also thinking about some of the risks and the challenges that we have with every migration. And I've got a later slide that goes into that in a little bit more detail. And we're also working through with you around the business benefits and the business value of doing the migration in the first place. A BizTalk migration is not a straightforward exercise. It's not a case of a nice wizard that can go next, done. So it's clear, important to make sure that the business benefits and value are established as part of that assessment. So the next slide I wanted to talk about was just a little bit about how we develop integration solutions at HSO. And to be honest, this is true whether it's a BizTalk migration or a greenfield implementation at HSO. Our approach is based on accelerators and best practice. So we've got an extensive accelerator library that we use at HSO. And we like to think of it as using a layered model. So if you think about that in terms of layers, at the bottom, you've got Azure Integration Services. These are all of the wonderful features and capabilities that Microsoft provide. But on top of that, we then have our cloud, Azure Cloud Landing Zone Accelerator. So when we deploy integration solutions into Azure, they leverage a lot of those platform features, whether that's identity, security, network governance, cost management, and so on and so forth. And we do a lot of that through our cloud landing zones. Now, for customers who have already got a footprint in Azure, then we can certainly be adopting and working with the footprint that you have. But for some customers where you're maybe new to Azure, or you've just got some very small workloads in Azure, then we can certainly work with you using our Azure infrastructure team to help you with that cloud adoption and all of that Microsoft best practice to put that cloud landing zone in place. The next layer up is the Azure Integration Accelerator. So our Azure Integration Accelerator represents all of the integration best practice and core components that we deliver for all of our integration platforms. And again, this is true whether it's a BizTalk migration or a greenfield integration. And that encapsulates all of our best practice and allows us to then efficiently build out all of those integration processes that then sit on top. And we have other sets of accelerators, whether that's for DevOps or various other workload-specific integration process accelerators as well. So the key point here is that in terms of our methodology and how we design and deliver integration solutions, it's all based on accelerators. Those accelerators all encapsulate HSO best practice, and they're all aligned with the Microsoft well-architected framework, which is one of the key inputs into our methodology. So the well-architected framework, for those of you who've not come across it before, it's a set of architectural procedures and a framework and some artifacts that define how we design and develop workloads in Azure. And there are integration frameworks that Microsoft provide as well. In terms of some of the challenges relating to BizTalk migrations, like I said, there is no silver bullet here. It's not a case of a nice wizard that makes this easy. This is a migration that requires re-engineering and re-architecting of integration processes in Azure. BizTalk was developed 20 years ago. The technology that it uses and the way that it's been designed as essentially a monolithic server is very different from the way that Azure Integration Services and indeed the cloud works in general. So when we come to think about how we move from BizTalk to Azure, there is an element of redesigning and re-implementing that needs to happen. And that presents a number of challenges and risks. And one of the keys to success of any migration is understanding what those risks and challenges are from the very start, and making sure that we put in place steps to reduce and mitigate those risks. So on this slide, I've just highlighted a couple of them that we find as we talk to customers and take them on this journey. So the first one is around the functional piece. If you're going to migrate BizTalk integration processes to Azure, you've got to know what each integration process does. It sounds obvious, but when you've got an integration process in BizTalk that's been running without fault for 10 years, then the people who designed and developed that process may not be in your business anymore. The information and the knowledge and the documentation may have grown stale over time. And so we've often find a lot of customers don't really have any accurate documentation or detailed knowledge as to what those existing integration processes do. And that presents some challenges and some risks. So if you do have documentation around what your BizTalk processes do, then fantastic. That will really help us and help speed up the process. If you don't, then it would be something that you should really start trying to think about now, because we work with customers where the documentation, it doesn't exist, and that then is a significant risk to the project. Next one's more of a technical one. Like I said, the BizTalk environment is very different from the way Azure is. And that means that there is an element of re-engineering integration processes as we move from BizTalk to Azure. And that in itself presents challenges. So at HSO, we've got a number of patterns that we use in terms of how we design and develop integration processes in Azure. And we've also got patterns that say how we take typical integration scenarios in BizTalk and then replicate them and create the equivalent in Azure. Moving on quickly because I'm running out of time. Planning is really important. This is something we focus on from the start. And we're working on that phasing of those processes. And just some of the others quickly. Testing is always really important. And again, knowledge being lost makes it can make it hard to do the testing. And cutover as well. So making sure we plan for that cutover to reduce the impact on the business. These are all key migration challenges that we will focus on from the start. And I'm probably gone over on time, so that's me done.
Sorry, Classic started to talk whilst on mute. Thanks for that, Mark. Really appreciate it. What I'll do now is we haven't got much time left from the scheduled time we've got booked. I'll give you the high level of two interesting case studies. The customers who've moved from BizTalk, one of them is just started working with HSO, and the second one is an organization that's been working with HSO and doing this migration. But both of them indicate one thing. This is, if you've been using BizTalk quite extensively, it can be quite complicated in the process. One of HSO's advice is, we don't really believe customers should be doing big bang migrations across from BizTalk. What we've found to be more successful is to do piecemeal, small bites to take it in that direction, understand the platform, move it, integration, what becomes important to the business. And that's when Mark talks about that first stage of understanding what you're trying to achieve, understanding the business process becomes really critical to HSO. The first one I'll talk about is an organisation in the Netherlands, retail distribution organisation called Technische Unie. They've got about 37 branches and 3 distribution centres, 2,300 employees. But the key thing is, when we started to work with them and analyse their environment, they had approximately 300 different integrations. They wanted to move to the cloud, they wanted to upgrade from the BizTalk they were on, and they wanted to understand how they do that. So we spent quite a bit of time working with them. We utilised our relationship with Microsoft as a fast-track partner, where we used Microsoft resources to come in. We looked at the environment, analysed the environment, and said, how do we do that stepped approach? Where do you get the most business value when you're doing that migration across from the platform? So it's been very successful. When I would say these guys we're looking at it where we started the project earlier on this year. When they look at the full program, they're looking to migrate off BizTalk over to a 2-year time frame. So again, when we start looking at this 2027, 2028 time frame to when support gets switched off, we really do need to start counting backwards from that and saying, how have you looking at the value from moving to Azure integration services, but also being cognitive of there is a shelf life we're dealing with here. So that's one customer. Another customer who we've spent quite a lot of time with working actually is a insurance business, again from the Netherlands. Then the Netherlands team, as I said, they're our international organization. The UK team of about 15 different consultants on the integration side, and about 60, 70 people on the cloud services side. We work very closely with the colleagues in the Netherlands who have a larger team. We also have a nearshore team in North Macedonia, top of Greece. And then we have an offshore capability as well in India, where again, when we're tackling any projects, we can use it to make it the most cost effective for customers, but also we've got a wealth of skills in which we can call upon. But if I look at Gouda, this is a company which is about 100 years old now, selling insurance. It's quite an interesting story when they started off in bicycles. Nowadays, to embrace technology, which a modern insurer does with the multi-channel environment and the ability to administer claims, etc., they've moved to a full cloud approach, and HSO has been part of that. Now, we started working with this organization in 2018 because they knew they wanted to move to cloud. They started by doing that hybrid approach, what Mark talked about, where they moved BizTalk into cloud. As time started to progress, they realized actually their whole business needed to move into the cloud. And so we started again to do that piecemeal approach to transition them over. And again, we're looking at just completing the process of bringing them completely into the cloud. So again, one of the things we wanted to do, again, they've got a SaaS before PaaS policy, which is, again, we can go through and talk about what that means and how you can use iPaaS services, etc. And it does have an impact on what you're doing. But one of the key things they understood was by 2020, they were able to close down their on-premise data warehouse. They disconnected from it all because they'd moved to the cloud, and they were able to modernize then their environment. All the new integrations were then deployed inside of the cloud environment. And like I say, a very important part of it was start with a small project and end with a small project. Final project from our side started 2018, and the final integrations we'd done from the migration from the initial systems and the partner systems, etc., ended up in 2023. One of the interesting things also to note is what we would say is that initial analysis up front gives customers the understanding of the scope of the project, the length of the project, the value that will get delivered, because the incremental value that gets delivered also enables you to build it's easy to build a business case around that, because you can show the value each time. You can show that staged deployment of value and how it increases your ability to work in a cloud environment. I mean, if I look at this customer, they had things such as servers with post-it notes on saying, do not unplug. We had to work through with the customer to say, what does that actually mean? Where does it fit into your environment? How do you build an integration reference architecture? So 2 examples of customers where we've worked with them. We started off by doing these initial assessments. So the first conversation, I would say, is what we've put here. You've got to scan me code. But what we generally do as we start working with organizations is we go in, we have an initial discussion to understand your landscape, to understand your technical background, to understand where you're going as an organization, what systems and what cloud environments, etc. What do you need to extend your integrations externally in the organization? So we have that to scope it out. Now, it's fair to mention, although there's absolutely no commitment, there is, depending on the project, depending on the situation, because of our relationship with Microsoft, we can apply for certain Microsoft funding to help us with these initial assessments. But we can talk about that in the initial conversations, what we have. But again, no commitment from Microsoft ourselves, but it is something that we've utilized in many of the projects you've looked at, and then also using extended Microsoft resources like the fast track, what we've mentioned. Now, I think we've got a little bit over time, but I thought we'd give you an opportunity for anybody in the audience, while we've got Mark, who understands, how to deploy these solutions, while we've got Steph from Microsoft, who understands all the nuances around the licensing, etc., and what we need to do and the challenges we face on both sides. Is there any questions from the audience?
Please don't ask me licensing questions, folks. Stephen's absolutely overestimating my knowledge. I have people for that.
Well, I guess the nice thing about Azure Integration Services is that there is no real licensing question.
Between that and trying to make IIS work, I think you've hit the nail on the head. But I've been using cloud since 2013 because I absolutely love anything where I don't have to do patching, where I don't have to do licensing, and where Microsoft just takes care of as much as possible for me.
Okay, if there's no questions, we'll just say thank you very much for turning up today and listening right to the end. We really appreciate your time. Everybody's busy. If there is any questions, you'll get a copy or a link to the presentation with my email address on it. If you need to fire anything off to me, please do. And I look forward to catching up with you on the next session. Thank you very much, Steph.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for
Stephen.
attending.
Thank you, Mark.